Soprano Catherine Malfitano grew up as a child of the Met. Her father was a violinist with the acclaimed opera house, and her mother a dancer in its ballet corps. At a young age, her father became her vocal coach. 3 years after her graduation from high school, she made her New York debut in La Boheme at the New York City Opera. In 1979, James Levine invited her to the Met. This season, she is singing the title role in Strauss's Salome and Cha-Cha-San in Puccini's classic opera, Madama Butterfly. On December 27th, PBS will air her performance of Madama Butterfly, which was taped last season at the Met, and we're very pleased to have her here this evening. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. You just finished a run at the San Francisco Opera.
Of Madama Butterfly, in fact.
Yes. These are two of your favorite roles, to know a little bit about you that I know.
Yes.
Salome and Madama Butterfly.
That's right. And Madama Butterfly came into my repertoire in 1987 and Salome in 1990. And so those are recent additions, actually, to my repertoire. You know, I just finished a run in San Francisco, but it was a debut, by the way. After 23 years of career, one can still have a debut. Yes. Can you imagine? And those are two roles that I adore, and there are many likeness. There are many things about the two roles that are similar.
Like?
They're both the same age, approximately, which is 15.
15. I was going to say 16, yeah.
They both die very young.
Yes.
Madama Butterfly, she lives for 3 years. Salome lives for a day in the course of the opera. They both die out of a great love for someone, unrequited love in a sense, although Madame Butterfly actually consummates her love with Pinkerton, and Salome does not with Johannahan, although she does after she has his head removed.
Yes.
There are great similarities between the two roles.
And do you approach them with any similarity?
No, I don't, except that there are things from my own past, from that time period in my own past that I use from those teenage years, where it's I remember very clearly that it was easy to be so much in love that the thought of death was very close to love. I think, especially with first love, it's very easy to envision dying for that love.
Yeah. Therefore, you can understand, turning this to a kind of a social circumstance, those awful circumstances where you read in the paper of some young teenager who commits suicide out of some sense that their life is over because their love is over.
Exactly. Oh, totally. And I remember that. I remember feeling if I could just die on the fantastic kiss of my first lover, I thought my life would be complete. And it's an idealization that young people have of love and romance. Yeah. And these composers have captured these ideas in their music and in the drama.
When you look at the character who's 16 or 17, you're obviously not 16 or 17, and other sopranos who've performed these roles have not been 16 or 17. And it's almost a contradiction in a sense. Never has there been a 16 or 17-year-old who's done this. And in a sense, and it's accepted by the opera-going public and critics and for a long time.
Well, it's the illusion that an artist can create for the audience. And in fact, I think a 16 or 17-year-old could not really create that illusion as successfully.
Because they have not lived those experiences that are important.
No, they're not beyond that experience yet. They're living it so fully that they might be able to express certain aspects very well, but then they wouldn't be able to express the aspects of disappointment, the way one gets to know it as you get older and relive those feelings. But also, you know, I was very influenced by great dancers like Carla Fracci, Margot Fonteyn, Maya Plisitskaya, all of whom I had seen as a young girl, and I saw them in roles like Romeo, Juliet, in other words, Juliet, Giselle, and in all of these situations, they were portraying, again, this romantic young girl. And none of them, of course, were of the age of the heroines they were portraying. But I was so affected by the depth with which they could convey not only the romanticism of that age, but also the humanity of what all those feelings mean. And I think you do need a certain amount of distance and age to be able to recreate those feelings vividly.
Yeah, I know people have said to me before on this broadcast, have said, you know, you shouldn't even read Tolstoy until you're over 30, because you can't comprehend all of the emotions that it is dealing with.
At least you should read it twice in your life.
Yes, exactly. You bring to Madame Butterfly, some critics have said, in complimenting you, in praising you, that you, unlike others, don't try, and there's not a good word for this, the Japanization of it,
right.
That you look really to the fact that it was written by an Italian.
That's an interesting comment.
Composer.
Yes. Well, on one hand, I do try to find the spirit of the Japanese woman in the role. I do think Puccini wanted to capture that, and I think he does. It's not to say that I don't try to find something about the Japanese movement, which for me is not so much doing the cliché Japanese movements, but finding the Japanese simplicity, which is what I think is so piercing in its effect to the audience when you see a great Japanese film, for instance. There's not a great deal of movement.
Yes.
But there's an essence about the Japanese spirit, which I think Puccini was also trying to portray. So I think it has to be there. On the other hand, there is this Italian Valpolicella, you know, running through the blood of Madama Butterfly in the music, and it's all the passion that comes from within. For me, the ideal is to try to play the outside in a kind of not overly emotional style, but have it all come from within and through the text.
Yeah. We're going to now look at a clip from the Madama Butterfly that will air on PBS on December 27th. For those who have not seen this opera, essentially they may have seen, they may know the story, but if they don't, this is just to tell the story, and then we're going to see Act 3. I just want to set it up so that we'll appreciate more of what we will hear when we watch this clip.
Well, as I said, Madame Butterfly is a girl of 15 who is going to marry an American naval officer.
Named Pinkerton.
Named Pinkerton. At least she believes that she is marrying him in good faith, that he's marrying her in good faith. But actually the practice of this time was to marry off girls in a rather convenient style for naval officers, which was really not considered true marriages. And in fact, before she comes onto the scene, he says, well, one day I'm going to marry my real wife, an American, and this is just, well, for him it's just a one-night stand, actually, to put it bluntly. But she sees it really as a true marriage, and perhaps she sees it also as a way to transcend her circumstances. I see her as a very strong individual who's trying to find a way out of her society, and that perhaps she's trying to find a way to go to another country. She renounces her religion and, in effect, renounces her upbringing and her family, and obviously has a desire to be taken out of this culture. In any case, he leaves her after this night of love, and he promises that he will come back when the robins return. And so she thinks within a year he will return, and he doesn't return for 3 years.
And when he does...
And in fact, there's a touching moment in the opera when she asks the consul, Sharpless, how long does it take for the robin to return in your country? Here it's one season, but perhaps over there it's longer. And of course, when he does return, he's returning only to collect the child that he's heard that she's had.
And he's married.
And he's married, of course. And so now Butterfly has to make the very momentous decision to give up her child or not to give up her child. She does make the decision to give up her child, primarily because she's now in a position where she's an outcast in her own society. She has nowhere to turn. Her option to go to America, to be taken to America, is already over with, and she has nothing to offer the child. I mean, she has her love, obviously, but she thinks that this will be a transformation for a child, a kind of a gift to the child, that it's more than a sacrifice. It's the hope that through her death, the child will be offered a better life.
Roll tape. Here it is. How does it feel to watch yourself?
One gets used to it.
Yeah. Tell me, go back to when you were growing up and your father was the Met and your mother was with the ballet corps. Did you know early on, with all that musical influence around you, that you wanted to sing?
No.
Or what happened? What led you to where you are?
It's a very interesting thing. I think I was given this path, and I didn't know it was given to me. It was never a conscious decision early on, you know, the way many singers decide when they hear a Met broadcast one day. Yeah. That's what I want.
I will be on that stage at some point in my life.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas for me, having grown up in New York City with the exposure to all the arts, to opera from a very early age, being backstage at the old Met, being in the dressing room with my mother, watching performances, it became a very familiar aspect to my life, but I never looked at it as, aha, this is something I could do. It was only many years later, and the funny thing is, all along, I was making all the steps that one would make if you were making a decision to. That is, I went to schools like High School of Music and Arts, and I went to the Manhattan School of Music after I was rejected from at the Juilliard School. And I made all the steps necessary without actually saying, this is what I'm going to do. Singing was something I did from a very early age with great pleasure. In school, I was singled out. I was in choruses, citywide choruses, before I actually did solos.
Did somebody say, I mean, I think I read this somewhere, did somebody say to your father, you must train her because the violin is the best instrument to
Well, in fact, I was in this all-city-wide chorus with a gentleman named John Motley, and he was really the first person who said, Catherine, you've got a great singing talent, and your father should be teaching you, should be helping you. In fact, he encouraged my father to help prepare me for the auditions for like the Juilliard, Manhattan School, and so forth, for high school as well. And so, yes, the voice being close to the violin, but also just the fact that there, in my family, was a musician, a person of the theater who could give me great wealth of information.
And what did he say to you when you were rejected by the Juilliard?
Well, both my parents just said, forget about it and continue.
We will not miss a beat. We will double our efforts, and
Yes, they gave me the feeling that, well, Juilliard wasn't the only place to be. There are other places as well, you know. Even if they consider themselves number one and Manhattan School was the Avis of music schools. In fact, Manhattan School of Music turned out to be a very good choice for me because of their, actually, at that time, superior opera theater. And I didn't know it yet, I have to tell you. I went into the Manhattan School of Music and still didn't know I was going to be an opera singer. And it was, because I had thought I wanted to be an actress, I wanted to be a dancer. My mother was a dancer. I had a great affection for dance. I loved films. And then it was suddenly in Manhattan School of Music, I had always been singing and I loved singing. Then I realized that opera was something that could put all those elements together. And it was only then that I realized the path was, in a sense, completing itself in terms of my destination. I had already been on the path, but I didn't recognize it. And suddenly being at Manhattan School of Music, being in their opera theater program, and beginning to perform in New York, because at that time, student performances were viewed by the New York public, they still are, and reviewed by the many newspapers that existed at that time. Harold Schoenberg, in fact, came to my first operatic performance of
all the stages you have appeared on. I mean, Magnon in Paris.
Manon.
Yes. And I mean, where all the places you have appeared is somewhere. What's closer to home for you of all those places, all those countries, all those?
Depends on what you mean by home.
Well, place that you feel most comfortable.
Oh, I feel comfortable in the world. I love being a gypsy. I love it. It's really a part of my nature. You know, I grew up in New York City, and New Yorkers and New York people think that that's the center of the world. And so I kind of thought New York was the center of the world. But somewhere towards the end of my teens, I realized I wanted to get away, that I wanted to see more than New York City. And that's all I've been doing is traveling ever since then. And I realized that I can never do without New York, but in a certain sense, I feel at home in so many different places. I can't really choose because there is a wealth of culture. And I think really to be a world citizen as an artist is a very important
In many ways, there are many roles that you shouldn't do too young. Like what?
Like Salome.
Salome is one. If you had done that early, it would not have been good for you. And some people come and wear out their voices doing it?
Well, certainly they wear out their voices because their young techniques can't support many of these roles, but not only from the point of view of the singing of it, but also from the emotions. Again, we're talking about roles like Salome and Butterfly, which are characters of such a young age, and yet the emotions that they're expressing are so much on the edge that for a young artist who hasn't yet learned how to incorporate on the edge living with their technique, it can be extremely dangerous. Roles like Lady Macbeth of the Verdi opera Macbeth, also difficult to do early on. But a good career is usually and hopefully structured in such a way that you do roles according to your ability, your maturity, your the stage that you're at.
Is there a role you hope to grow into, so that you'll be ready for in the future that you're not yet ready for? There
are roles that I'm looking forward to doing. For instance, Lady Macbeth is something that I am going to be doing in a couple of years from now.
But that you have not done.
I have not done. There are always roles I'm looking towards that I have not done yet, and there are a couple of Wagner roles now that people have been talking to me about doing, and I'd love to do those. But Carmen is another role I would love to do.
Doesn't everybody seem to want to do that?
I think so. Probably, but on the other hand, you know, there's a great tradition of sopranos and mezzos doing the role. The reason why I would like to do it as well is because I have the feeling of the dancer inside of me that wants to explore this role. It gives great opportunity for a singer who loves to act and dance, and well,
yes,
it's a great challenge. It's like Don Giovanni. It's the female Don Giovanni, and those are the two most difficult operas, really, to succeed in doing.
I should mention that on December 27th, PBS will telecast the performance that we have seen an excerpt from here this evening. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. Pleasure to meet you. We thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. See you then.